Welcome to Chosen by Love, where fate brings hearts together in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin today's journey. Sometimes the biggest lie you ever tell becomes the place where your real life begins. Maren Ellison stared through the windshield as rain dotted the glass in slow, uneven rhythms, turning the familiar streets of Cedar Ridge into blurry memories. 10 years. Somehow an entire decade had slipped away since she had walked across the high school football field wearing a graduation gown, convinced life would eventually make sense. It hadn't. She tightened both hands around the steering wheel as the glowing sign outside the Lakeside Event Center came into view. Cedar Ridge High School. 10-year reunion. The words made her stomach twist. She almost kept driving. Maybe nobody would notice she never showed up. Maybe the stories everyone imagined about her were kinder than reality. She parked anyway. The engine fell silent, leaving only the soft tapping of rain against the roof. Her reflection appeared faintly in the driver's side window. Her navy blue dress was elegant enough, bought on clearance after 3 weeks of debating whether she could afford it. She had curled her blonde hair herself that morning after watching 3 online tutorials. The small silver bracelet around her wrist had belonged to her mother, the only piece of jewelry she truly treasured. It wasn't expensive, but she never attended important moments without it. She whispered to herself, "You survived high school. You can survive 2 hours." Her phone vibrated. A message from her best friend Olivia. "Please tell me you actually went inside. Don't let Ethan think he won." Maren let out a nervous laugh. Ethan, the boy who had once promised forever beneath the old oak tree behind the gym. The same man who had ended their relationship 2 months after graduation, because he wanted someone more ambitious. She had heard through social media that he now owned several luxury car dealerships and was engaged to a fitness influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers. Of course he was. Maren locked her phone and stepped into the cool evening air. Music drifted from inside the ballroom while cheerful laughter spilled through the open entrance. Former classmates hugged each other as though no time had passed. Everyone looked successful, confident, certain. She suddenly felt like she had accidentally wandered into someone else's celebration. Before walking inside, she slipped into the small coffee shop next door, hoping 5 quiet minutes might steady her nerves. The cafe smelled of fresh espresso and warm cinnamon rolls. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers while rain shimmered outside the front windows. Only a handful of customers occupied the room. Maren ordered a small latte, wrapped both hands around the warm paper cup, and chose a table near the window. She rehearsed possible conversations in her mind. "I've been teaching 3rd grade for 6 years. That sounded respectable." She could avoid mentioning the tiny apartment, the student loans, the evenings spent tutoring just to keep up with rent. The empty seat beside her suddenly became impossible to ignore. Every invitation to the reunion had included a +1. She had left hers blank. A burst of laughter outside caught her attention. Ethan stepped out of a black SUV, opening the passenger door for a stunning brunette in an ivory coat. Cameras from classmates' phones immediately appeared. They looked like they belonged on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Maren looked down at her untouched latte. Maybe leaving now wouldn't be so embarrassing after all. She reached for her purse, quietly pushing back her chair, when a calm, deep voice came from the table beside her. "If you're planning to escape, you should know they'll probably remember that longer than anything you wear tonight." She turned. A tall man in a charcoal jacket sat alone with a cup of black coffee and an unread newspaper folded neatly beside him. His expression carried an easy confidence without a trace of arrogance. His blue eyes studied her for only a second before returning to his coffee, as though he hadn't said anything unusual. Maren managed a polite smile. "I'm sorry." The stranger glanced toward the reunion entrance, then back at her trembling hands. "You're going to the reunion." She blinked. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you've looked at that building 6 times in the last 2 minutes. Heat rushed into her cheeks. "I didn't realize anyone was paying attention." He gave a small smile. "People notice more than you think." Outside, Ethan wrapped an arm around his fiancée as another group welcomed them inside. Maren quietly sighed. "I guess tonight just isn't my night." The stranger followed her gaze for a brief moment before standing. He straightened his jacket, picked up his coffee, and walked toward her table. Then, with a voice low enough that only she could hear, he leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Pretend you're with me." For a heartbeat, Maren simply stared at him, convinced she had misunderstood. The stranger met her uncertain expression with a calm smile that somehow made an impossible suggestion sound perfectly reasonable. "You do not know me," she whispered. "That is true," he replied. "But I know that look. It is the look people have right before they let someone else define their story." She let out a nervous laugh. "You make that sound dramatic." "Maybe it is." He picked up his coffee and nodded toward the ballroom entrance across the parking lot. "Walk in with confidence. Smile when people look at you. If anyone asks questions, let me answer first." Maren folded her arms. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" He paused for only a second before saying, "Because I have seen enough people embarrassed in public to know nobody deserves it." Something about the quiet certainty in his voice lowered the wall she had been holding up all evening. He did not sound rehearsed. He did not sound curious about her life. He simply sounded sincere. "I still do not even know your name," she said. He smiled again, almost amused. "Tonight, I do not think that matters." Before she could ask another question, he offered his arm with effortless politeness. "Shall we?" Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered whether he could hear it. Every sensible thought told her to refuse. Instead, she slipped her hand lightly through his arm. His jacket smelled faintly of cedar and fresh rain. Together they crossed the parking lot beneath the glowing lights reflecting on the wet pavement. The music grew louder with every step. As they entered the ballroom, conversations slowed. Heads turned. Maren felt every pair of eyes land on her. Yet somehow she did not panic. The stranger walked with an easy confidence that never felt arrogant. It was almost as if crowded rooms had never intimidated him. Within seconds, someone called her name. "Maren, you actually came." A group of former classmates hurried over, smiling with genuine surprise. Before she could introduce the man beside her, one of them laughed. "And you finally brought someone with you." She froze. The stranger answered before the silence became awkward. "I kept telling her we were going to be late if she stopped for coffee." The group laughed immediately. It sounded natural, comfortable, as though they had known each other for years. Maren looked at him in disbelief. He simply winked so quickly that nobody else noticed. The conversation flowed around them. He remembered names after hearing them once. He congratulated one classmate on opening a veterinary clinic after noticing the logo embroidered on her jacket. He asked another about his construction business after spotting dried paint beneath his fingernails. Every observation was subtle. Every comment made people feel seen. Maren found herself relaxing despite everything. Across the room, Ethan finally noticed her. His confident smile faded just enough for her to catch it. He excused himself from the group surrounding him and walked over with his fiancée beside him. "Maren," he said with practiced confidence, "it has been a long time." "It has," she answered politely. Ethan glanced toward the stranger. "Are you going to introduce us?" Before Maren could invent a story, the man beside her extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Ethan shook it. "I am Ethan." "I know," the stranger replied with an easy smile. "Maren has mentioned your name." Maren nearly stopped breathing. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Hopefully only good things." The stranger looked toward Maren before answering. "Only the honest ones." There was no insult hidden inside the sentence, yet Ethan seemed unsure how to respond. His fiancée quickly redirected the conversation toward the buffet, and within moments they walked away. Maren exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. "You are surprisingly good at this," she whispered. "At pretending?" he asked. "At making people comfortable." He looked around the room filled with old classmates laughing over forgotten memories. "Most people only want one thing," he said quietly. "They want to feel important for a few minutes." She studied him more carefully now. His watch was simple. His suit fit perfectly without appearing flashy. He never mentioned what he did for a living. He never tried to become the center of attention. Yet people naturally drifted toward him as though confidence itself had its own gravity. Maren could not explain it, But for the first time that evening, she stopped worrying about what everyone else thought. Instead, she found herself wondering the only question that mattered. Who was the mysterious man who had walked into her worst night, and somehow made it feel like the beginning of something completely unexpected? The evening unfolded with surprising ease, almost as though the awkward years between graduation and adulthood had quietly disappeared. Music from a local jazz band drifted through the ballroom while classmates wandered from table to table sharing stories about careers, families, and dreams that had either come true or changed completely. Marin found herself smiling more than she had expected. Every time an uncomfortable question came her way, the mysterious stranger somehow redirected the conversation without making it obvious. When someone asked how they had met, he answered with a grin. Sometimes the best stories begin with terrible timing. Everyone laughed, accepting the answer without pressing further. Marin glanced at him, amazed by how naturally he seemed to belong anywhere. A few minutes later, one of the reunion organizers clapped her hands to gather everyone's attention. "All right, everyone. We are bringing back an old tradition. Find your partner because the next dance is for couples." A playful chorus of cheers filled the room. Marin's smile immediately disappeared. "We should probably leave," she whispered. "Not yet," he replied calmly. "Running away now would only make you remember tonight for the wrong reason." Before she could object, he extended his hand with quiet confidence. "May I?" She looked at the dance floor, then back at him. Every sensible instinct reminded her that she did not even know this man's name. Yet somehow she trusted the kindness in his eyes more than the opinions of people she had known for years. She placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, respectful, and reassuring. As they stepped onto the polished wooden floor, the first notes of a gentle piano melody echoed through the ballroom. Around them, dozens of former classmates began moving slowly beneath strings of warm lights hanging across the ceiling. Marin felt awkward at first. "I should warn you," she admitted with an embarrassed smile. "I have not danced since senior prom." "Then we have something in common," he answered. "I have never believed dancing is about perfect steps." She laughed softly. "What is it about?" "Making the person beside you forget everyone else is watching." Somehow that was exactly what happened. The room seemed quieter. The conversations faded into the background. Instead of worrying about Ethan or anyone else's opinion, Marin found herself listening to the stranger's calm voice. They talked about ordinary things. She told him about teaching third grade and how one of her students insisted every Friday should officially become ice cream day. He smiled with genuine amusement instead of polite obligation. He admitted he spent far too much time traveling for work and had become an expert at finding decent coffee in unfamiliar cities. "That sounds lonely," she said without thinking. He looked at her for a brief moment before answering. "Sometimes success creates very quiet hotel rooms." The honesty in his voice surprised her. It was the first personal thing he had shared all evening. As the music continued, her silver bracelet caught against the sleeve of her dress. The tiny clasp loosened, and the bracelet nearly slipped from her wrist. "Wait," he said. Gently. He carefully stopped moving and reached toward her hand. "May I?" She nodded. With patient fingers, he secured the delicate clasp back into place. He handled the bracelet as though it were something priceless. "There," he said. "It would have been a shame to lose something important." Marin smiled warmly. "It belonged to my mother." His expression softened immediately. "Then I am glad we caught it." For a moment neither of them spoke. The simple gesture lingered between them longer than either expected. Across the room, Ethan happened to glance in their direction. Instead of seeing an uncomfortable act, he saw two people laughing together as though they had shared years of memories. The realization clearly unsettled him. Marin noticed but no longer cared. When the song ended, applause filled the ballroom. The stranger stepped back politely but never released her hand until she had regained her balance. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "When you arrived, you looked like someone waiting to be judged. Right now, you look like yourself." She lowered her eyes, feeling unexpectedly emotional. "I almost stayed home tonight." "I am glad you did not." Before she could respond, another classmate hurried toward them carrying a phone. "Everyone, group photo outside by the fountain." As dozens of people began making their way toward the entrance, Marin realized something unexpected had happened. Somewhere between the first nervous step into the ballroom and the last note of that dance, pretending had started to feel remarkably real, and the one question growing louder inside her mind was no longer whether she had made the right decision. It was why a complete stranger seemed to understand her better than people who had known her for half her life. The group photo ended with laughter echoing across the courtyard as flashes from dozens of phones illuminated familiar faces against the softly lit fountain. For the first time all evening, Marin did not feel invisible. She stood shoulder to shoulder with classmates who had once seemed impossible to impress, and somehow she no longer cared whether they approved of her. As everyone slowly drifted back inside for dessert and final conversations, she turned toward the stranger with an expression filled with gratitude. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. He smiled as though the answer were obvious. "You already did." "How?" "You stopped looking at the floor." She laughed, shaking her head. "You really notice everything. Only the things people try hardest to hide." Before she could ask another question, his phone vibrated inside his jacket. He glanced at the screen for less than a second before silencing it without answering. A few moments later it buzzed again. Then a third time. Marin noticed the growing list of missed calls reflected briefly across the dark screen. "You should probably answer that," she said. "It looks important." "It can wait." "You are certain?" He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Tonight belongs to someone who almost convinced herself not to walk through that door. The sincerity in his answer left her speechless. They wandered toward a table displaying old yearbooks and photographs from high school. Marin laughed as she found an embarrassing picture of herself wearing oversized safety goggles during chemistry class. "I cannot believe they kept this." "I hope they never throw it away," he replied. "Why?" "Because the smile is exactly the same one you have now." She looked at the faded photograph, then at him. No expensive compliment could have felt more meaningful than those simple words. A reunion volunteer approached carrying a guest book. "Would both of you mind signing this before you leave?" the woman asked cheerfully. Without hesitation, Marin wrote her name. She handed the pen to the stranger. He paused for the briefest moment before writing something beneath her signature. His handwriting was elegant but quick, and before Marin could glance at the page, he gently closed the book and handed it back to the volunteer. "Thank you," he said politely. Another mystery, she thought. Who signs a guest book so carefully yet never introduces himself? Nearly an hour later, the ballroom had begun to empty. Chairs were being folded, centerpieces collected, and old classmates exchanged promises to stay in touch more often than they probably would. Ethan crossed the room one final time. His confident smile had softened into something closer to curiosity. "It was good seeing you, Marin," he said. "You seem happy." She surprised herself by answering honestly. "I think I am." Ethan nodded before looking toward the man beside her. "Take good care of her." The stranger simply smiled. "That is easy." Ethan walked away without another word. Marin watched him disappear through the front entrance, realizing that 10 years of unanswered questions had quietly lost their power in a single evening. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Cool night air carried the scent of wet pine as they stepped into the nearly empty parking lot. Reflections from the streetlights shimmered across the pavement. They stopped beside her car. Silence settled comfortably between them. "I guess this is where our performance ends," Marin said with a bittersweet smile. "Maybe performances always end," he replied. "The question is whether the story does." She searched his face, suddenly aware that she still knew almost nothing about him. "At least tell me your name." He hesitated, almost as though choosing whether to reveal something important. Then headlights swept across the parking lot as a black sedan quietly pulled alongside them. A man in a dark suit stepped out and approached with unmistakable respect. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "we have been trying to reach you for over an hour. The board meeting in Seattle has been moved to tomorrow morning. The aircraft is ready whenever you are." Marin frowned, confused by the formal tone. The stranger gave the driver a subtle look before answering calmly. "Thank you. I will be there shortly." He turned back toward Marin with an apologetic smile. "It seems real life has finally caught up with me." Before she could ask what any of it meant, he reached into his pocket, removed a neatly folded receipt from the coffee shop, and wrote a phone number across the back. "If tonight ever makes you smile instead of worry," he said as he handed it to her, "call me." Moments later the sedan disappeared into the quiet night, leaving Maren standing alone beneath the glowing streetlights with nothing but a handwritten number, unanswered questions, and the strange feeling that the man who had walked into her life for one evening had been hiding far more than just his name. Maren barely slept that night. For 4 evenings in a row, Maren reached for the folded receipt before bedtime, tracing the handwritten phone number with her thumb but never dialing it. Some stories felt too extraordinary to be real, and she feared one phone call might shatter the memory of that impossible night. On the 4th afternoon, before she could make up her mind, fate arrived at her school instead. The folded coffee shop receipt rested on her bedside table beside the silver bracelet her mother had once worn every day. She must have picked up the receipt a dozen times before finally placing it back down. A handwritten phone number. No name. No company. No explanation. Just one unexpected connection that refused to leave her thoughts. The following morning, life returned to its ordinary rhythm. Her third-grade students filled the classroom with endless questions, colorful drawings, and enthusiastic stories about their pets, favorite superheroes, and weekend adventures. Their laughter usually pushed every other concern out of her mind, yet every quiet moment brought her thoughts back to the mysterious stranger. During lunch, another teacher walked into the faculty lounge carrying a tablet. "Did you see this?" she asked excitedly. "Some billionaire is making headlines again. Apparently he canceled a huge meeting after disappearing for several hours last night." Maren looked up without much interest until a photograph filled the screen. The coffee cup slipped from her hand and landed softly on the table. It was him. The same calm smile. The same blue eyes. The same charcoal jacket from the reunion. Only now he stood behind a podium with dozens of cameras pointed toward him. The headline read, "Technology visionary Alaric Vaughan announces expansion of Vaughan Dynamics." Maren felt the room grow strangely quiet. She barely heard her coworker continue speaking. "He is worth billions. They say he built one of the largest artificial intelligence companies in the country before he turned 40. Billionaire." The word echoed inside her mind. She looked back at the photograph. Nothing about him the previous evening had suggested wealth. He had never mentioned private aircraft, board meetings, or business success. Instead, he had listened to stories about third graders celebrating ice cream day and patiently fixed the clasp on an old silver bracelet. That evening, curiosity finally overcame hesitation. Sitting by her apartment window with a cup of chamomile tea, she typed his name into an internet search. Hundreds of articles appeared instantly. Business magazines called him one of the most influential entrepreneurs in America. News interviews described him as brilliant, disciplined, and intensely private. There were photographs of award ceremonies, international conferences, and charity events. Yet none of those polished images looked exactly like the man she had met over coffee. They showed a businessman. She remembered someone who had quietly protected a stranger from embarrassment without expecting anything in return. Her phone rested beside the keyboard. She glanced at the handwritten number again. Surely someone like Alaric Vaughan had forgotten about one random evening at a class reunion. People in his world probably met hundreds of new faces every week. Calling him now would only remind her how impossible the entire experience had been. She folded the receipt once more and slipped it inside her favorite novel as though hiding it might also hide her feelings. 3 days passed. Then 4. On Friday afternoon, the final school bell echoed through the hallway. As Maren gathered stacks of student artwork into neat folders, the school receptionist appeared at her classroom door with an expression somewhere between confused and amused. "Maren," she said, "there is someone asking for you." Maren frowned. Parents usually scheduled meetings in advance. She followed the receptionist toward the front entrance, mentally reviewing which family might need help before the weekend. The moment she stepped outside, she stopped walking. Parked beside the curb was the same understated black sedan she had seen after the reunion. The driver stood respectfully beside the rear passenger door. As soon as he noticed her, he smiled politely and opened it. Alaric stepped out wearing a navy sport coat with the sleeves casually rolled back. He looked exactly the same as he had at the reunion, except now there was no crowded ballroom, no pretending, and no reason to hide. Several teachers glanced curiously through the front office windows while children climbed onto school buses behind her. Alaric walked forward with the same quiet confidence she remembered. "Good afternoon, Maren," he said warmly. "I was beginning to think you were never going to call." She stared at him, still processing the impossible scene unfolding outside her school. "You knew where I worked?" His smile carried a hint of apology. "I hope you will forgive me. You wrote your profession in the reunion guest book before I signed beneath your name. It took less than 5 minutes to find the only third-grade teacher named Maren Ellison in Cedar Ridge." She folded her arms, trying not to smile. "That sounds slightly unfair." "Perhaps," he admitted. "Which is why I came to ask your permission before asking anything else." "Permission for what?" He looked directly into her eyes, his expression suddenly sincere enough to quiet every nervous thought. "To take you to dinner. This time without pretending to be anyone except ourselves." For a moment Maren forgot the school buses, the curious glances from teachers standing inside the office, and the afternoon breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass across the playground. She simply looked at Alaric, wondering how someone whose face appeared on magazine covers could stand in front of an elementary school, looking completely unconcerned about being recognized. "Dinner," she repeated. "Just dinner," he answered with a relaxed smile. "No pretending. No audience. No reunion. No expectations." She studied him carefully. "You are asking a schoolteacher to have dinner with one of the richest men in America." He chuckled softly. "Actually, I am asking the woman who made me forget 3 board meetings to have dinner with the man who likes terrible coffee and unexpected conversations." She could not help smiling. "That sounds much less intimidating." That was the goal. 30 minutes later, after she gathered her things and changed into a simple cream-colored sweater she kept in her classroom for cool afternoons, she climbed into the sedan. Instead of heading toward an exclusive restaurant surrounded by cameras, the driver stopped outside a quiet lakeside diner overlooking a small marina. Families laughed on the outdoor patio while children tossed breadcrumbs to ducks near the water. Maren looked at Alaric in surprise. "I expected something much fancier." "So did my security team," he admitted. "They argued with me for 20 minutes. Then why here?" He opened the restaurant door for her. "Because this is where I stop whenever I drive through Cedar Ridge. They make the best apple pie within 100 miles. She laughed. "That is a very specific measurement. I have tested the competition." The hostess greeted him warmly without any sign of surprise. Clearly he had been there before. They were seated in a quiet corner beside large windows overlooking the lake, as the late afternoon sunlight turned the water into shimmering gold. For the first time since they met, they talked without pretending to be anything other than themselves. Maren shared stories about her students, describing how one little boy proudly announced that reading 2 books in 1 week made him feel like a superhero. Alaric listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions instead of politely waiting for his turn to speak. "You really love teaching," he observed. "I do," she replied. "Some days are exhausting, but when a child suddenly believes in themselves because of something you said, it reminds you why you stayed." He nodded slowly. That kind of success never appears on financial reports. She noticed something change in his expression. "What about you?" she asked gently. "Do you enjoy what you built?" He looked through the window toward the quiet lake before answering. "I enjoy solving impossible problems. I enjoy creating opportunities for people. But somewhere along the way, every conversation started with my company instead of my name." His smile carried a trace of sadness. It becomes difficult to know whether people are talking to Alaric or talking to the idea of Alaric Vaughn. Maren understood more than he expected. "That is why you never told me who you were." "Exactly." He folded his hands together. "At the reunion, you treated me like an ordinary man before you knew anything else. I had not experienced that in a very long time." Their meals arrived, but the conversation never lost its quiet honesty. Hours slipped by unnoticed. As evening settled over the lake, they walked slowly along the wooden pier. The water reflected the first stars appearing overhead. A gentle breeze brushed loose strands of Maren's hair across her face. She tucked them behind her ear as they stopped near the end of the dock. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. Why did you really help me that night?" Alaric rested his hands on the railing. "Because 10 years ago I skipped my own class reunion." She looked at him surprised. "You did?" "I convinced myself I was too busy building my company." The truth was simpler. "I was afraid the people who remembered the awkward teenager I used to be would never believe the man I had become." He smiled quietly. "Then I saw you sitting alone in that coffee shop, trying to gather enough courage to walk inside. And I recognized that feeling immediately." Marin looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist, remembering how carefully he had fastened it during the dance. Without thinking, she rested her hand lightly on the wooden railing beside his. Their fingers almost touched, but neither of them moved. The silence between them felt peaceful until the distant sound of a camera shutter echoed from the parking lot. Neither of them noticed the long camera lens aimed in their direction, or the photographer quietly lowering it with a satisfied smile before disappearing into the fading evening light. The photograph appeared online the next morning before either of them finished breakfast. One image was all it took. Alaric and Marin standing at the end of the wooden pier beneath a fading sunset, looking at one another with quiet smiles while the lake shimmered behind them. The headline was, "Harmless enough, but the internet rarely stayed harmless for long. Billionaire Alaric Vaughn seen with mystery woman after private dinner." By lunchtime, dozens of entertainment websites had copied the story. Comment sections filled with guesses from strangers who had never met either of them. Some insisted she must be another celebrity. Others claimed she was a business executive. Then someone discovered her name from an old reunion photograph posted on social media. Within hours, people learned that Marin Ellison was a third-grade teacher in a small town. The opinions changed immediately. Some comments praised the unexpected romance. Others questioned her motives without knowing a single fact about her life. Marin tried to ignore it until one of her fellow teachers quietly placed a hand on her shoulder during lunch. "You should probably stay away from the internet today." She forced a smile. Too late. She had already seen enough to make her heart sink. Complete strangers debated whether she deserved to stand beside someone like Alaric. One anonymous post accused her of chasing wealth. Another suggested the relationship had been carefully planned. She closed her phone and slipped it into her purse. Her classroom deserved her attention far more than people hiding behind anonymous profiles. Even so, the words lingered in the back of her mind throughout the afternoon. Hundreds of miles away, Alaric sat inside a glass conference room overlooking downtown Seattle. Financial charts filled a massive screen while executives discussed quarterly projections. His assistant quietly slid a tablet across the table without interrupting the meeting. The article appeared instantly, then another, then dozens more. A member of the board cleared his throat. Public attention can be unpredictable. Another executive spoke more directly. If this develops into a media distraction, shareholders will start asking questions. Alaric closed the tablet without another glance. The company is performing better than it ever has. That is not the issue, someone replied. Perception influences confidence. He remained calm. Then perhaps people should have more confidence in character. Then gossip. The room fell silent. The meeting continued, but his thoughts remained in Cedar Ridge. That evening he called Marin. She answered after the second ring. "I was wondering when you would call," she admitted. "I wish it were under better circumstances," he said softly. She walked onto the small balcony outside her apartment, watching the last colors of sunset disappear behind the rooftops. "You warned me your world was complicated. I should have warned you sooner." She leaned against the railing. "Do you regret meeting me?" There was no hesitation. Not for 1 second. His answer arrived so quickly that she smiled despite everything. "Neither do I." Silence settled comfortably between them before Alaric spoke again. "But I do regret that my life is making yours more difficult." Marin looked down at the silver bracelet around her wrist, gently touching the clasp he had fastened during the reunion dance. "Children asked me today whether I knew someone famous. They did not care about money. They only wanted to know if he was kind." "And what did you tell them?" She smiled to herself. "I told them he was the kind of man who fixed a broken bracelet before anyone noticed it might fall." Alaric quietly laughed. That may be the nicest introduction I have ever received. The conversation ended with promises to see each other again soon, yet neither mentioned the growing pressure surrounding them. 2 days later, the pressure became impossible to ignore. A black luxury vehicle stopped outside the elementary school just before dismissal. This time it was not Alaric. A professionally dressed woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She introduced herself as Victoria Sloan, Director of Public Affairs for Von Dynamics. Her expression remained courteous, but there was unmistakable concern in her voice. "Miss Ellison," she began gently, "I came because Mr. Vaughn would never ask this himself. The attention surrounding both of you is growing much faster than anyone expected, and there are people inside the company who believe this relationship could damage important negotiations. I thought you deserved to know before matters became even more complicated." Marin thanked her politely, but as she watched the car disappear down the street, one painful realization settled over her heart. Loving an ordinary man might have been simple. Caring about someone whose entire life belonged to the public was becoming something neither of them had ever truly prepared for. Victoria's visit lingered in Marin's thoughts long after the school parking lot had emptied. She knew the woman had not come to threaten her. If anything, Victoria had looked genuinely conflicted, as though she respected both of them while also understanding the weight carried by a company employing thousands of people. That night, Marin sat alone at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. She unfolded the coffee shop receipt that Alaric had written on weeks earlier. It reminded her how everything had started with one simple act of kindness instead of ambition. She touched the silver bracelet on her wrist and quietly whispered, "I cannot become the reason his world falls apart." The next morning she drove to the city without telling Alaric she was coming. Von Dynamics occupied an elegant glass tower that reflected the morning sky. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying laptops and coffee cups, while television screens displayed company announcements. Marin felt completely out of place as she approached the reception desk. Before she could introduce herself, the receptionist smiled politely. "Miss Ellison, Mr. Vaughn asked to be notified immediately if you ever arrived." Within minutes, the elevator doors opened and Alaric stepped out himself instead of sending an assistant. His face brightened the moment he saw her. "You should have called," he said warmly. "I wanted to surprise you. You succeeded." He noticed her expression change almost immediately. "Something is wrong." She nodded gently. "Can we talk somewhere private?" He led her to a quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline. The wind carried the distant sounds of traffic while sunlight reflected across neighboring buildings. For several moments neither of them spoke. Finally Marin reached into her purse and carefully placed the folded coffee shop receipt into his hand. "I think our story should end where it began," she said softly. His smile disappeared. "Do not say that. Please let me finish." She looked directly into his eyes, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I did not meet you because of your company. I did not stay because of your success. I stayed because you made a frightened schoolteacher feel brave again. But now every headline, every rumor, every meeting seems to cost you something. I cannot become another responsibility you have to carry." Alaric shook his head. "You are not a burden. Maybe not to you." She took a slow breath. "But to everyone around you, I am becoming one." She slipped the silver bracelet from her wrist and held it in her hand for a moment before fastening it again herself. "The night you fixed this clasp, you told me it would have been a shame to lose something important. I have been thinking about those words ever since." He stepped closer. "Then do not lose us." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. "If I stay, people will keep believing I came into your life for the wrong reasons. If I leave, at least they cannot use me against you anymore." He reached for her hand, but she gently stepped back. "Marin, you deserve someone who does not create headlines." He smiled sadly. "The headlines are not about you. They are about people inventing stories because they have never experienced something real." She looked away toward the endless buildings below. Reality does not always matter when public opinion decides first. A long silence followed. Finally she whispered, "Thank you for the reunion. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists." Before he could answer, she turned and walked toward the elevator. Alaric remained standing on the terrace, watching the doors close between them. He did not chase after her. Deep inside, he understood that love built on respect could never be forced. Later that afternoon, another board meeting began inside Vaughn Dynamics. Executives discussed investments, acquisitions, and international partnerships, but Alaric barely heard a word. Instead, he quietly opened his wallet. Folded inside was the same reunion guest badge he had kept since the night they first met. Attached to it was a tiny photograph from the group picture outside the fountain. Marin was smiling without fear for the first time in years. He looked at the image for several seconds before making a decision that surprised even himself. He closed the folder containing his prepared speech for the company's annual foundation gala, pushed it aside, and calmly instructed his assistant, "Cancel the script. Tonight I am going to tell everyone the truth." The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as business leaders, journalists, investors, and charitable partners filled every seat for the annual Vaughn Foundation Gala. Giant screens displayed highlights from projects that had changed thousands of lives. Yet backstage, Alaric ignored the polished speech his communications team had prepared. He folded the pages neatly, handed them back to his assistant, and smiled. Tonight they deserved the truth instead of another presentation. Hundreds of guests applauded as he walked onto the stage. Cameras immediately focused on him. He thanked everyone for supporting the foundation before pausing far longer than anyone expected. The room gradually fell silent. "Every year," he began calmly, "people ask me what the greatest investment of my life has been. They expect me to name a company, a technology, or a business decision. Tonight my answer is different." The giant screen behind him faded to black. Then an unexpected photograph appeared. It was not a corporate success. It was the reunion group picture taken outside the fountain in Cedar Ridge. A quiet wave of confusion spread across the audience. Alaric smiled at the image. "Several weeks ago, I met someone by accident. She did not know who I was. She did not ask what I owned. She did not ask what I was worth. She only accepted the kindness of a stranger because she was trying to find enough courage to walk into a room that frightened her." Every camera turned toward the stage. People later decided to write their own version of that story. Some believed she wanted my money. Others believed our meeting was carefully planned. They were all wrong. His voice remained steady. "The truth is far less dramatic. I was the one who walked over to her table. I was the one who whispered, 'Pretend you are with me.' She never asked for anything. I asked her." Murmurs echoed throughout the ballroom. Reporters lowered their phones for a moment, listening instead of typing. Alaric continued, "The world often measures people by titles, wealth, and influence. Yet the most remarkable person I have met this year is a third-grade teacher who spends her days convincing children that they matter. She reminded me that kindness is still the greatest form of leadership." At that very moment, hundreds of miles away, Marin sat quietly in her apartment grading spelling quizzes. Her phone vibrated again and again until Olivia finally called. "Turn on the television right now," she said breathlessly. Marin switched on the broadcast just in time to hear Alaric speak her name. Tears immediately filled her eyes. "She tried to walk away because she believed protecting my reputation was more important than protecting her own happiness," he said. "If anyone should apologize, it is me. I allowed silence to become louder than truth." He reached into his jacket pocket and held up a familiar object, the folded coffee shop receipt. "This little piece of paper reminds me that the greatest moments in life cannot be scheduled in a boardroom. They happen when ordinary kindness changes two ordinary people forever." He looked directly into the nearest camera. "Marin, if you are watching, I am finished pretending. I hope you are too." The next morning before sunrise, Marin drove back to the quiet coffee shop where everything had begun. The rain had returned, gently tapping against the windows exactly as it had on reunion night. She stepped inside and smiled when she saw Alaric already sitting at the same table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. Neither of them spoke immediately. They simply laughed at how extraordinary ordinary moments could become. "I watched your speech," she said softly. "I meant every word," he replied. She reached into her purse and unfolded the coffee shop receipt one last time before placing it on the table between them. "Then I think this belongs to both of us now." Alaric nodded, then carefully reached for her hand. His eyes dropped to the silver bracelet she wore every day. With the same gentle care he had shown during their first dance, he checked the clasp to make sure it was secure. "Still holding," he whispered. Maren smiled through happy tears. "Just like us." A year later, their former classmates gathered once again. This time for a casual picnic beside the same lake where so many memories had been rewritten. There were no expensive speeches, no photographers, and nothing left to prove. Only laughter, friendship, and gratitude. As the sun began to set, Alaric led Maren toward the old fountain where they had stood after the reunion. He took a quiet breath, smiled with the same warmth she had first noticed in the coffee shop, and said, "The first time we stood together, I asked you to pretend. Today I have only one question left. Will you stay beside me for the rest of our story?" Maren answered before he could say another word. "Yes." The applause that followed came not from strangers impressed by success, but from friends celebrating two people who had discovered that the richest life is never built by wealth alone. It is built by kindness, honesty, and the courage to stop pretending. If this love story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in true love, and subscribe to Chosen by Love for more unforgettable billionaire romance stories, emotional journeys, and inspiring happy endings. Your support helps us create more heartfelt stories that remind us kindness, courage, and genuine love can change lives forever.